Business. It's a Thursday. It means we head into our Power Suit segment. It means we spend some time speaking to the C-suite here in South Africa. And tonight I'm joined by Sam Ngobeni, who's the Chief Operations Officer at Aka Ventures. He is in the studio to speak about his life, his work, and his journey. Sam, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the invite.
Before we get into your work, maybe let's talk about you, where you're from,
Yeah.
and let's talk a little bit about your childhood, your upbringing, what kind of a kid you were.
Oh, dear me. What kind of a child was I? Well, I grew up in a very complicated home.
Okay.
That's for sure. Slightly bright in school, not too much, right? And enjoyed spending time with friends. Sometimes I spend most of my time in the library. So I enjoyed reading. So that's literally how I grew up. And also because of the conditions at home. And I had a very specific group of friends, and I think in part that is attributed to the person that I am today. I didn't really have many hobbies or things outside of school, books, and those particular, few friends. Grew up in Winterveld. I did my primary school at a school called Edwin Moalusi in Lebanon, and then did my high school at a school called Abel Mutswani Secondary School, again in Winterveld. I haven't been there in a very long time, but essentially that's where I spent most of my time. Then moved immediately after matriculating, and then did my diploma in financial management in Pretoria, and I've lived in Pretoria West, Joburg, and Cape Town ever since.
When you walked into the studio, you said Thobela. Nobody's ever said that to me before.
Yeah.
Not walking into the studio, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so a little bit around that. I was adopted by a Pedi family when I was still back in high school. Okay. Right, Ngobeni itself, it's a Tsonga surname, but my mom passed on some years back, and then immediately my father the next year. But at the time, I was already living with my adopted family. So usually I would visit them, so during school, I would be in Winterveld. Holidays, then I would be with my adopted family, and so forth and so forth. So essentially, I've been raised by my Pedi family. So when I say family, that's who I refer to, my mom and my dad and my siblings. And yeah, so Limpopo Kerai, their home is now my home. So effectively, Sepedi, that's the home language. Yeah.
Very interesting indeed. And I thought it just stood out for me when you greeted me like that. Let's talk about life after studying financial management. I also studied a finance of sorts. I know that, sometimes you study things, then when you start to work in them, you feel like you're going to die because it's not fun. I'm wondering if it was like that for you in financial management.
So for me, when I matriculated, I didn't go to tertiary immediately after. So I actually started my first business after matriculating, so the year after matriculating. A little bit of financial difficulties. And so I started my first business, and then a year later, then I went to school. I did an internship for a year at an investment holdings company in Centurion. And immediately after that, I left and then went full-time into entrepreneurship. And I've never looked back since that. I've had a passion for numbers, but not to the extent that I would want to be an accountant.
Yeah,
right? That would be horrific.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah, so, and I've had quite stories in there. There's always been a passion of, I still enjoy the finance field, but in a different way, perhaps in private equity, investments. And I think it's important for any individual, entrepreneur, not to just understand basic numbers, right? Like how to just understand, the fundamental basics when it comes to just understanding finances. I think that's important. It helps with budgeting. It helps with managing, finances for your business and the like. So I think it's an important skill. And I still do hope to get into the field, to consolidate my experiences in that particular field. I don't know when yet, but it's still a very interesting field of mine. If you want to really make money, you have to understand it, essentially.
I hear that. Now let's talk about the entrepreneurial bug. It obviously bit you young, and then it continued to bite.
Yeah,
I'm keen to hear about that journey.
So I start my entrepreneurship journey in high school. Right, I had a group of friends at the time. One of them, Brian, is still a very close friend and business partner even to this day. When we started, they were like, when you're still in school, you're doing like some small scale projects. And I remember we entered a few competitions with organizations like Prime Stars at the very beginning. Prime Stars is probably one of the biggest entrepreneurship organizations for high school students. I respect their work, and we have enjoyed partnering with them over the years. And so we started with competitions. Immediately afterwards, we then started our first business in the school. So we started a tutoring company. So we were essentially tutoring students in the lower grades, right? And at the time, we used to charge like $20. I can't remember was it for a class? Was it per week? But we, small amounts. But at the time,
it was money.
It's good money.
Yeah.
You can get lunch, during break and stuff. So pretty interesting. And so we did that for quite some time, and we had a number of things that we were generally involved with. Immediately after that, of course, fast forward to after my matric, that's when I started my first business. We closed that in its second year. The concept that I had at the time, and I mean, it was really, I thought we were onto something. So we started a company that we were hoping to turn into like an investment company, but for community businesses, right? So around us, you could see some businesses that had high potential, but they need a little bit of capital to be able to really, really, thrive and also just increase maybe their growth potential. And so we thought we could. At the time, we hadn't really built a very broad network. And so it was difficult to really break into the offices or into rooms with people that had sufficient funding for us then to be able to plow into these small businesses. But to this day, it still remains a passion of mine. There are businesses in our communities that don't necessarily require hundreds of thousands of rands in investment. You could literally just give them 10,000 rands, as a very patient loan, right? It doesn't have to be money where they have to 10 times their growth as we see in the VC world and startup world. You could give them a very small portion of money that is going to allow them to increase their stock. It's going to allow them to maybe introduce a little bit of digital tools around there. It could be a sponsor store and so forth. We have literally seen businesses that can thrive in our communities with as small as 30,000 rands, 50,000 rands. And so that's where the premise of that idea came from. I still hold that to this day, that there are certain businesses that don't fit into the mold of VC and startup world. And South Africa is not a startup country. We're still a very, very much SME nation. Our ability to support these SMEs collectively as a nation, corporate, government, our ability to do that means we are uplifting communities, because the small businesses are contributing a huge chunk to the national GDP. We need to give them just a little bit of fuel, right? But it cannot be the same funding as we see in private equity, in VC. And certainly we need to loosen a little bit of, our considerations when people are applying for government funding. We do that, I think we have a high chance of really, really uplifting certain communities. And then, so immediately after that, I then co-founded a marketing agency, which I joined at the end of my 2 years in the first company that I started. We ran that for many, many years. We've worked with corporates in the country, companies that are listed on JSE. We've worked with companies outside of South Africa as well. So, and really just helping them to curate, marketing strategies that are able to amplify their message, reach new customers over these new channels that we currently have. And then quickly over to now, one of the prominent organizations that I'm part of is called Startup Grind. So I'm the director in running Startup Grind Joburg. With that, of course, we've grown the organization to about 7,000 members. And what is it that we focus on? We are literally just helping small businesses, startups really build a community and providing them with tools and resources they need to build sustainable and scalable businesses, right? So, and this takes place in different forms. So we have pitch battles where we give direct funding. We're giving them access to our partner products. We have a broad range of partners that a small business cannot have access to on their own. And so we use our reach and our pool to then bring these people in and just allow them to receive these offers or these products and services at a steep discount. So whichever organization we work with, they come in, they have to bring whatever they're bringing on a discount to make it favorable to the small businesses that we're working with. So over the years, my history and experience has broadly been just working with startups, small businesses, investors, ecosystem enablers, anything that we can do to propel entrepreneurship and to help them succeed is a space that I've been involved in over the past few years.
It's very interesting because, of course, what we see there is, not waiting, I think, Sam, to be old and grey before you look back and make sure that you're creating a life out of helping and serving others. I want to speak about that trait in yourself, and maybe even speak about the leader that you have become as a result of wanting to hone that trait.
Yeah, so we have been fortunate. As I mentioned, where I grew up and where I went to school, not all of us made it out. And there are a number of circumstances which attribute to that. But one of the things that I've been really honed in on is understanding that if we are as a nation to really rise to the potential that we do hold, and I'm an optimist, I do believe that we do have the skills and the resources we need to move over wherever we might be. And so having done so myself with support of various entities and various people, it has become important for me to also just give a little bit of that to others so that they realize there is a potential path to building the lives that we want to build. One of the things that we're currently doing, and something that I'm very vocal about, is how much we need to do in terms of entrepreneurship in high schools and tertiary institutions. We do have companies that are doing a few things in that space. I mentioned Prime Stars. We do have some competitions in EDI as well, in the tertiary sector. But I do believe that we still have more to do. So if we can be able to really open up the space, I believe that the earlier that we start, the better, right? And we have to pick this up from the grassroots. And I've been fortunate because I started in high school, and that's how I came to be where I am now. And it's important for us then to quickly go back and say, look, there is an opportunity, but we need to relook the model on how we introduce entrepreneurship in our academic institutions. And one of the reasons why I'm passionate about this space is I strongly believe that academic institutions are already mobilized. So take an institution, let's say UCT, for example. If a student is part of UCT and that entrepreneur, the institution, because of their pool and their resources, are able to attract further resources from different corporates using their name to support their students, right? So there is, of course, institutions will focus on wanting students to pass their academics and get their qualifications and so forth. But consider the reality of the country. Where exactly are we as a nation? We have high levels of unemployment. And as I already mentioned, I believe that we're still very much a small business and SME nation. But we need to do more of really giving people access to the education and the knowledge that they need to actually see that it doesn't have to be complex or complicated to build businesses, not to scale. We often speak about scaling in startup world, but not to scale. Something that can be sustainable and sustainable enough to just support someone and their family, and then hire one person and then two people and so forth. And it doesn't have to be to hire everyone. Start with one person, add two people. That other person that you've hired, they also have a family. So now, this is it has a compounding effect on the community. And we're not looking to make mega changes on a large scale without doing this from the grassroots, right? So we just have to apply the compounding effect to entrepreneurship. And again, if we do that correctly and if we do that consistently over time, we don't want to have policies that work for a few months and then after that they don't produce any results. You do that consistently, and you do that, providing the right tools, the right education, the right support. Over time, you're able to see the results. And if we make entrepreneurship not a buzzword, but really if we make it a field that people can get into and give them pathways to actually build sustainable businesses, I think we can start turning certain things in our communities.
It's very interesting, your thoughts here on this ecosystem, because of course, as you speak, it also means that you've taken a lot of time to think and plot and work in this space here. I'm wondering how the environment could be better, and when we also speak of stakeholders here, one of the big stakeholders, and I think many entrepreneurs believe that government is the biggest stakeholder in bringing entrepreneurship about and making sure that it is as impactful as you say it is here. What would you say, we're not quite getting right in that regard?
So maybe let me start with the stakeholder part of it. The first important stakeholder in this equation is the entrepreneur, the founder themselves. No one gets to do that for you, right? The building of a business, running it successfully, the perseverance, the waking up in the wee hours, staying up at night stressed, that directly belongs to the entrepreneur, right? We can have the government and the stakeholder in the support conversation, but responsibility has to be with the vision bearer, the person who really believes that this is something that I've wanted to do for a very long time, and I do believe that, sustainably so, and with the right support, I can do it. We're not saying government needs to come in and do the work for entrepreneurs. It doesn't work that way, right? You do the work first and then you get the support, but the support has to compound or becomes a layer on top of what you're already doing, right? So let's put emphasis on the most important stakeholder being the actual entrepreneur, the one who has to make the business work. Second to that, briefly in government, we can do with a lot of, quite a lot of changes in our current policies, right? So whether it's government communicating with funding and financial institutions to say, well, look, you need to make the loans that you're providing to small business a little bit favorable. Government can be able to help us with that influence, right? They can mitigate with, you want to speak about tax breaks, you want to speak about how we can further make our taxation system a little bit easier on them. You want to make a little bit of a change and differences to the current institutions that they have. Not that they reduce the barrier to entry to funding institutions like the NYDA, CEDA, the Department of Small Business and so forth, but they really need to work for the people first by being on the ground and to truly understand what kind of support do entrepreneurs need. And I respect and appreciate the work that they've done. But one of the things that we've called for over time is they need to really go to the streets, communicate and speak to the spaza owners, the ladies that are selling things on the streets and so forth, and truly understand what are the difficulties that a small business is likely to encounter. That is the only way they can know how to further iterate on their current policies. But to do it in a boardroom, to do it in a parliamentary caucus session without really engaging the people, I don't know why I'm sounding political now, but without really engaging the people that are directly impacted by this, I don't think it's going to work. We have a long way until we can have policies that are really favorable. And particularly you hear businesses say one of our main things are on funding. It is true, funding is one of those mitigating factors, as I mentioned earlier on, that if you give a little bit of funding, some of these businesses, they're not looking for millions of rands. Give them just the slightest of support. Give them a little bit of education. We need the government to further look at their digital transformation policies. Could they provide tax breaks for the implementation of certain digital transformation tools by small businesses, right? And how can they make that adoption slightly easier for these businesses? Could they work with certain corporates that are providing these digital transformation tools? And you can speak about, to make it, less complex, speak about perhaps, online invoicing tools as an example. So if you have a company that is providing invoicing tools for businesses that predominantly work with cash and writing things on books and so forth, how do we integrate this as part of the policies that, government institutions are playing? The other one, corporates. I think corporates can also come to the party. And then again, further work with government to make things slightly favorable and better for the small businesses.
We do have a call on the line. Phil from Waterkloof would like to engage us this evening. Phil, thank you for your call. It's been a while. Are you well?
Good. I'm awesomely well, and good evening to you, Noltando, and good evening to your best guest. The economy is very dynamic and competitive. Now, it will require that the higher education and the polytechnics should continuously study the trends and produce students who can challenge the economy by giving skills that are relevant to the economy, and therefore giving children and students the functional capital development programs. The functional capital development programs are those that are not the old skills, but the new skills which can help them to challenge the economy. They can do that thing by partnering with the private sector. With the private sector training the universities and polytechnics with curriculum to teach, so that your students that come from your that we sponsor can be able to be absorbed into them. Rather than doing the vice versa, university producing students that cannot be integrated. But our education system too needs to move away. We need to see the demise of pedagogy and see the resurrections of andragogy, where students get experiential learning by being channeled, and at the end of matric, they either become employees or they become entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs is something that gets developed from an early stage with the interactive play learning, which produces the 21st century employees, where we focus not only on the 3 R's, mathematics, reading and writing.
Okay. Thank you for that, Phil. It's always a pleasure speaking to you there, and I think certainly giving us a lot more to think about. Would you like to respond to that? We don't have much time, Sam, but maybe you can respond to that briefly. Then I also want to speak about just you and what's next on your journey. What does continued success look like for you?
Fantastic. So to the gentleman's point, yes, we can do with a little bit of agility with our education system. That's the word that I would use. Tap and speak to corporates. I do agree there, because effectively they are the employers. So what new trends do we have? What changes are currently happening in the workplace? What new tools are on the market? And get anyone who is in the academic space, as any student, ready for the world of work. I think that's super important, but you can only do that by speaking with and engaging with companies that are in the world of work. What was the other one? What's next?
The question is about you. What's next, and what does continued success look like for you?
Continued success means we are further able to really proliferate and expand our footprint in academic institutions. We really want to work with both private and public institutions to further introduce some of our venture ideation programs in their institutions, help students be ready for entrepreneurship. And on the higher scale, outside of the academic space, of course, is, again, we want to further work with entrepreneurs, small businesses, startups, and funding institutions, and whoever provides tools and resources for them to say, help us to support these guys, because if we do a good job of supporting them, we're doing a good job of supporting the country.
Brilliant, Sam. It's been a pleasure hearing from you and also learning of your life and your story and your musings. Thank you so much for joining us on Power Business and Power Suit this evening.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. That is Sam Ngobeni. He is the Chief Operating Officer at Aka Ventures.
You've been listening to a Power 98.7 podcast. For more podcasts, visit power987.co.za or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.